Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Shawn, ESA Marketing Manager, and we'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar sponsored by Intertek. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. Please note that all callers will be muted for the duration of the webinar, so please be sure to use your question and/or your chat log to submit questions. We will be sure to address all questions at the end of the webinar. Additionally, a recording of this webinar will be available in the members-only resource library at esaweb.org. Now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Kramer, Intertek Marketing Manager.
Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you very much for that. First off, let me thank you all for attending, for your time and attendance today for today's webinar. As some of you have seen, this is actually our second webinar following the one that we had in late December, and that one was focused on the benefits of actually becoming listed. So, as Jacqueline mentioned, I'm the marketing manager today for Intertek in our life safety and security industry. So I'll be the one that will be gathering all this information to make sure, as Jacqueline mentioned, that you guys have the link to this webinar for future reference. As a quick note, in accordance with Murphy's Law, we're actually having some network difficulties today on our end. So I'm going to be remotely controlling the webinar. So you'll hear our speaker ask me to change the slides throughout. Just want to let you know that if that's why you're hearing that, this is exactly why it's happening. So, speaking of which, I'd like to introduce our main presenter, Arnie Miesch. Arnie has brought a wealth of experience to Intertek's life safety and security team, having worked for 12 years as a team leader for UL's burglary and fire protection department as an expert witness and leading consultant to attorneys firms involved with both fire and burglar alarm cases for over 5 years. Arnie is very well suited to help you better understand the listing process for your alarm company. So with that, I'll turn it over to Arnie. Arnie?
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on how to become a listed alarm company. One of the things in my 25-plus years in this business I've learned from being in the field is sometimes there's misinformation about how difficult and how cumbersome it can be to try to become listed. And hopefully today we're going to clear some of that misinformation up and help you better understand the step-by-step process required. So I guess first of all, what is it? Meaning, what is a listed company? It's really a differentiating factor for an alarm service companies confirmed through an independent third-party certification body that provides added value to the stakeholders, opening new doors to new customers and markets not previously available. It does give a competitive advantage to be a listed company. Next slide, please. What actually is the value added of being a listed company? It increases your market access. And in some cases, it's almost a requirement to do business in that market, depending on where you're at, what type of installations you have. Being a listed company by a national recognized testing laboratory is almost a necessity to do business in that jurisdiction. It also has its other additional benefits, as I think you will see as we go through this. It shows a higher commitment to customers because you, the alarm company, are held to a higher standard through mandatory requirements of the listing and subject to independent audits on a random basis. It gains credibility with the stakeholders, from insurance companies to authorities having jurisdictions in the fire market, to governmental agencies that require certification for certain type systems. The backing of the third-party certification body gives a higher sense of security knowing that behind the alarm company there is a third party like Intertek, Factory Mutual, or UL. Next slide. Becoming a listed alarm company. What it takes to separate yourself from the pack. not everyone can become a listed alarm company, nor do they choose to be. So let's go to be or not to be a listed alarm company. There are four main areas that we will be looking at today in becoming a listed company. Being listed is not for everyone, and there is an approval process involved to become listed, which includes maintenance, inspection, and testing contracts, auditing, and cost incurred to do all of this. So the four steps we're going to talk about is the approval process, the maintenance, the auditing, and the cost factors. So next slide, please. The first process we're going to talk about is the approval process. So let's get started with that. Next slide. The first part of the approval process is going to be the application part. We can go on to the next slide. Next slide. The application. This is where it all starts, and it usually starts in one of two ways. It either begins when you, the alarm company, contact us requesting information about becoming a listed company, or our account managers, for whatever reason, have reached out to you and contacted you to tell you about the Intertek ETL certification program. This is where it all starts, and from here we go to needing to find out what type of listing that you are looking for, or you are being required to have, or that you just request. It can be broken down into many categories. The three typical type listings an alarm company looks for is central station monitoring, or central station full service, or just burglar alarm installations only, or fire alarm system installations only. There are actually 11 different type of installations that you can become listed for as an alarm company, depending on what your needs are and what your wants are. So once we've determined what type of listing you require, then the account manager will design a customized quote based on the type listing that you actually need. Next slide. Again, next step in the process is customized quote. So now we have to determine two things at the beginning. And this is based off what your needs are. Are you actually transferring a listing from another recognized, national recognized testing laboratory, or is this the first time you've ever been listed by a national recognized testing laboratory? What we're talking about today in general is going to be burglar alarm installers or fire alarm installers. I will touch on central station requirements towards the end of the presentation, but most of what I'm showing you and talking to you about now is going to be based on an installer type listing, whether it be burglary or fire. The first thing that we are going to tell you is that you are going to have 3 sample installations ready for us to audit. They can be 3 installations of their choosing, i.e., if you were to say, well, I'm transferring my other NRTL listing to you, can I use 3 of those certificated installations to show you? The answer would be yes, you can. If it's a new listing and you pick out 3 locations that you feel will be more than acceptable to pass an audit, that's your choice at the beginning. But we will need to see 3 installations before the whole process is over. You will also be required to sign fuss agreements, which is a follow-up service agreement with Intertek. Once we have obtained the type of listing you want, once the customized quote is generated specifically for you, and then when the papers are all reviewed by you, signed by you, and sent back to us and submitted, then my office gets notified that everything is completed and we are ready to go to the next step. The next step is my office assigning an auditor that will do your actual audit. This auditor will be in direct contact with you as soon as possible after we have all the completed paperwork in-house. Next slide, please. Now the next step is an on-site audit and review. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, we're going to audit 3 pre-selected systems, not by us, but by your company. If you are wanting information and requesting information on central station listings, I will be happy to provide that for you via phone call, via email, but it will be completely different type of requirement if you're looking to become a listed central station. That's going to conform to UL Standard 827 and UL Standard 1981. They will be your Bibles for a central station listing. And we'll touch more on standards and codes as we go through this. The systems that you show us, if they're burglary, they have to be installed in accordance to the UL standards for the type of installation you're doing. If they're fire alarm systems, they have to be installed into the NFPA 72 code, 101 code, or whatever other NFPA codes are involved in this particular situation. I have down there the different locations have different requirements simply because depending on where you are in the United States, especially from a fire standpoint, will depend on what edition of NFPA 72 the authorities having jurisdiction are using. Could range anywhere, believe it or not, from 1999 to 2013. So whatever your local authority is using, that is the code that we would audit the system to, or the addition of the code. Again, if it's burglary, we will audit the system in accordance with UL Standard 681 and UL Standard 365. Once the systems are audited, then the auditor will come back and do what we call a findings report. Once that findings report is written, it will then come to my office for approval. If it's approved, then it will be loaded into our internal system. It will be made official. Then we will electronically send you a copy of the report. This normally takes a maximum of 10 days. Many times done much quicker, but depending on the complexity of the report, depending on the audit, and depending on the approval or being sent back for a correction, whatever the case may be, we're looking at approximately 10 days. Auditing 3 pre-selected systems, if we're talking burglary, understand that one of those 3 systems you have to show us will have to meet Extent 2 requirements. One of the systems has to meet at least Extent 3 requirements, and one of the systems must be a complete safe or complete vault. You can, again, choose whatever you want, but the 3 of those, one will have to be an Extent 2, one will have to be an Extent 3, and one will have to be a complete safe or vault. I would like to say one thing at this point that's not on the slide is once you apply for a listing with us and once the auditor is assigned to you, he is that. He is your auditor. He is available for you to call at any time or email. He is more than happy, or she is more than happy, to help walk you through the listing process to make life as easy for you and us as possibly can happen during this listing process time. We're here to answer your questions. We are here to guide you whenever we can. We will not install a system for you, but we will help you get it right the first time as best as we can. Next slide, please. The next part is issuing the report. And if we can go to the next slide. Basically, when a report is written, 4 things are going to happen, or 4 things could possibly happen. The first is there are no non-compliance items found during the audit, meaning that your company could be listed immediately as soon as the report goes through our internal process and gets made official. We can issue your listing to you. I have rare bracketed after no compliance items found simply because the statement is not meant to infer your company does not know how to install systems correctly. It simply means that with all the codes and standards involved in becoming a listed company, it's very easy to miss a minor requirement. Based on that, most of the listings we do, we will find 1, 2 minor items. That doesn't mean we can't list you, because we can and we will. But what it does mean is that if on the 3 installations you showed us, you were going to certificate those 3 installations once you become listed, we would not allow you to issue a certificate on those systems until you had corrected the minor non-compliance items that were found during the original audit. There are times where major non-compliance items are found, and we will, under those circumstances, withhold the listing of you as an alarm company until we have actually received documented written corrections from you that these have been corrected and are now in proper working order and are now properly documented, whatever the case may be. A major non-compliance item, as an example, would be a fire alarm control unit or a burglar alarm control unit that's not listed or not compatible with the type of service that's being offered. Basically, it's a hole in the system. If you keep that in mind, then you will pretty much know what we look for when we say major non-compliance items. If there's a hole in the system, burglary alarm installation is an example. The door, exterior door, is not contacted at all. It's not that the contact is not in the proper location. It's that there's no contact there at all. That's a major hole in the system. That would be considered a major non-compliance item. Now, it wouldn't be hard to correct, but it still would be considered a major non-compliance item because it is a hole in the system itself. Every once in a while, and I, again, been doing this for 25 years, and I think it's only happened to me twice, will we go out to do an initial listing audit inspection and find, for whatever reasons, that there are very, very serious non-compliance issues with the installations being shown to us, what gives us every indication that the people who have installed them are not knowledgeable enough of the codes and requirements to obtain the listing at this point in time. With that in mind, the audit could be stopped at any given time throughout the entire day if the auditor felt that he was wasting their time, and also could be better spent by trying to sit down with them and tell them where they need to go, give them direction on what they need to read and what they need to research. If that is done, then when the alarm company feels they are ready to reapply to try for the listing again, that's exactly what it would take. It would be a start-over process, and they would start at ground zero and go through the whole application, go through the whole approval process up until we come back out and audit them again. Again, happens very rarely, but in all honesty, I have to tell you it does happen. And a lot of the times this happens from, I guess, what you in the industry would normally call trunk slammers, to where there's somebody who comes into your city or your county or your town and undersells you, bidding a burglar alarm system by 80%, and then doesn't, A, know how to install it, B, doesn't do it properly, and once they get the money, they leave. So every once in a while, one of these companies will try to become listed, and they find out that they can't do that because they don't have the knowledge. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? Certificate authorization. Let's talk about the certificate authorization. There are actually two types of certificates that we're going to be talking about today. One is the certificate you will receive once you become listed. That's called the Certificate of Compliance. That will be your certificate from Intertek that says you are a listed alarm company, and it will say what you are listed for and what categories you are listed in. There are also certificates that you will have the ability of issuing once you become listed for the alarm installations themselves. So that's the two types. Your certificate that you get from us showing you are a listed company is one that the authorities having jurisdiction may ask to be shown, whether it be the underwriter and insurance companies that may be requiring this certificate on this jewelry store, or the fire marshal who may be requiring a fire alarm certificate be issued on this factory. So that's the one that's usually hung in your office, kept in your records, to where you can show anybody who needs proof that you are listed, that you are actually listed. Next slide, please. This is the Certificate of Compliance. This is the certificate that you would actually receive as the listed alarm company. This is the one that's going to show what you are listed for. And if it's more than one category, it will show more than one category. Next slide. These are the type of certificates that you will issue as a listed alarm company. It could be either a burglar alarm certificate or a fire alarm certificate, or another category that we do not have up here right now but is a certificated category is industrial security, which is when you do work for DOD, DOE, DHS, whatever that case may be, where they require a certificated alarm system on a installation that's doing secret, top secret, or subcontracting work for the government. But those basically would be the three types of certificates you would be issuing, either fire alarm, burglar alarm, or industrial security. And again, it will depend on what you are listed for. Are there companies out there listed for all three categories? Absolutely. Are there companies that are only out there listed for burglar alarm installing or fire alarm installing? Absolutely. So it all depends on what your needs, your requirements, and what your requests are. Next certificate, please. Timeline for resolution. This can vary a little bit, but let's talk about this a minute. Next slide. Normally, the resolution timeline, which begins when we have your documentation signed and in-house and we're ready to put things in motion from our end, is a maximum of 30 days. This can be extended or it can be shortened, and many times it is shortened. But the reason that I say it depends on the severity of the noncompliance items is, remember when I said if we had major noncompliance items that we would withhold your listing until you had corrected those major noncompliance items so that we can see you actually have done that. This could extend that 30 days depending on how long it took you to correct the noncompliance items. But maximum, 90% of the time is going to be a maximum of 30 days. So, next slide, please. One of the programs that we come up with, and it's been in effect now for about a year, is what we call our Alarm Direct program. No longer is it necessary to fill out a paper certificate request workbook form, then send it in the mail to us, and then we in turn review it. We in turn, if there's any corrections that need to be made or any information that wasn't supplied that we need, turn around and send it back to you. And then you turn around and send it back to us, and then we're finally in a position where we can print the certificate and mail it to you. We have changed all of that. Everything now with Intertek is done electronically. If you notice on the right-hand lower portion of the screen, you'll see a gray area with a lot of drop-down boxes. That's what we call the Workbook Information. And that's what your company, once you become listed, will fill in when you're requesting a certificate on an installation. That information is then sent to my gatekeeper, in this case my program coordinator, who then will review that information. If it's all properly filled out and if there's nothing missing, she will send it on to one of my auditors who is a designated reviewer to make sure everything is done correctly, everything makes sense. We will then approve it. We will then print this certificate electronically, and within 24 hours from the time you submit this workbook request for a certificate, you will actually be able to print out the actual certificate at your computer, at your desk, and take to the customer. There are times where we have an emergency situation from a listed client. In fact, we had one this morning. The client actually forgot that his customer's present certificate was expiring, and it did, in fact, expire last night at midnight. So he called this morning. He filled out their workbook request, sent it into the Alarm Direct program, then called the program coordinator and asked her if there was any way she could expedite this because he needed to get it to the client before the close of business today. Well, I'm happy to say that within 5 minutes, he actually got the certificate. 5 minutes from the time he called the gatekeeper or my program coordinator, he was actually printing out his new certificate for this particular installation. So there are times when a listed client will call us and say, we have an emergency situation, can you expedite this? And the answer is yes, we can, and we will do everything within our power to make everyone in the system happy. The alarm company, his customer, and also the authority having jurisdiction who may need to see it or he's going to lock the doors. So again, it's a great program. Once you were to become listed, my program coordinator will be in touch with you. She will issue you a user ID and a password. You then can get on the system. You then can generate the workbook information pages for the certificates that you need. Send it in electronically. It'll be reviewed, and we will then send it back to you if anything is missing. An example, just to show you what we would be looking for. If it was a burglar alarm certificate and you told us on the workbook that this was an extent 2, well, as most of you know, an extent 2 out there means complete saturation of one type or another. Yet, if on the certificate workbook request that you're asking or you sent in, we don't see any type of motion devices listed at all, we're going to question that, because how did you achieve an extent 2 without some type of motion device, photoelectric beams, or whatever the case may be? It may be just an oversight that one of the drop-down boxes wasn't filled in, but that's an example of the type of things that the reviewer looks for. But it's a great program, one that has enhanced the ability to request a certificate and get the actual certificate printed out within 24 hours. Not just a certificate number sent to you that you can show to the underwriter insurance company or the authority having jurisdiction. This is the actual certificate, which is normally requested to be hung right next to the control panel, whether it be a burglar alarm installation or a fire alarm installation. Next slide, please. The next portion we're going to talk about is maintenance. And I'd like to go to the next slide if we could. One of the main things that differentiate a listed or certificated alarm system versus one that is not is that the requirements, whether it be on the burglary end or the fire alarm end, the major requirement is you must have an inspection, testing, and maintenance contract with the customer in force for the duration of the certificate. So anytime you have a certificated installation or anytime you see a certificated installation out there, that means there is a maintenance, inspection, and testing contract in force because it's mandatory that it is. What that does is it helps you as an alarm company, because now you don't have to attempt to tell the customer how important it is that you maintain the system once you've installed it. It's a requirement. If he has to have a certificate, then this has to be enforced. So this not only benefits the customer from the standpoint of it being maintained correctly, it also benefits you, the alarm company, from the standpoint that you can maintain it correctly. That brings a lot of training and staffing and staying current with the codes and standards into the picture, because it's constantly changing, as you all know, within the industry. Customer contracts, again, a written agreement between you and the customer for inspection, testing, and maintenance on that particular system. Current technologies, you have to stay up with current technologies just from the simple standpoint of a competitive edge. But there's also technologies that are changing out there now drastically, and something I think you will see come into play in the very near future. It's into play now, but how much it will come into play from a certification standpoint, I think you're going to see that expanding, and that's video and video verification. So there's a lot of current technologies in play right now that I think are going to be very important in the alarm industry in the next couple of years. Next slide. The annual auditing, okay, this is going to talk about once you've become listed, how do you maintain that listing? So if we could go to the next slide. One of the important things to note is that once you become listed, you are then subject to random audits on your certificated installations that you have out there. Now, when I say random, please don't misunderstand me. One of my auditors isn't going to show up at your door to your office on Monday morning and say, okay, I want to audit your certificated systems. What it does mean is that once a year, one of my auditors is going to call you and say, it's time for us to do your annual audit. And we would like to set it up for such and such a date, such and such a time, if that's acceptable to you. And if it is, then that particular time and date, the auditor will arrive at your office. He may not tell you which certificated systems he wants to look at until he gets there that morning. That's where the random part comes in. And if you only have 5 certificated systems, it's not really a big issue because you know we're probably going to look at 3, 4, all 5 of those. But if you have 100 certificated systems, that means that you could be subject to us looking at any of those 100 that you have. Now, we also fully realize that there are exceptions to this. If it's a government building or if there's restricted access required, we will then make arrangements with you to notify you ahead of time that this is one of the locations we would like to see. So it's not like we're not able to work with you. Or if you have a customer who absolutely says, no, I don't want him here that day because I'm taking inventory or whatever the case may be, that's also fine. We can work with that. But we will, at one point or another, see an installation that we have been refused entry to for whatever the case may be. Otherwise, we will withdraw the certificate for that installation. We will cancel it because one of the requirements of having that certificate is that we have the ability of auditing that if at all possible. So that's the random audit. Now the operations part of this is that there's also a lot of documentation that's required in being a listed company, and it's simply because the standards or the codes require that documentation to be there. It's not something that Intertek /ETL has come up with on their own. It's based on the standards and the codes for the type listing you have and what documentation is required in-house in your office, what documentation is required on-site at the actual installation. So, but it will be looked at, and in many cases it's just as important to be there and for us to review as actually the installation audit is itself, especially when we're looking at compatibility issues. Is this motion device compatible with this control unit, or is this contact compatible with this control unit, or is this type of safe protection even listed for the type of protection it's being used for. So documentation, manufacturer's instructions, manufacturer's cut sheets, as-built drawings, all of this kind of thing come into play during an annual audit and actually the actual listing. But we will send you a basically 2-page letter for the annual listing telling you exactly what we expect you to have on hand. The installations. If you have installed the burglar alarm installations or the fire alarm installations or the national industrial security installations in accordance with the standards and the codes that are required for that type of installation, you will never have a major issue with any of our audits. It's that simple, because that's exactly what we guide on, is the standards and the codes that are in play for the type of listing you have and you are going for. Issuing reports. Again, after every annual audit, there will be a findings report issued, just like there is for the original listing. On the annual audit reports, you will be given 30 days to correct non-compliance items. And you will answer our report line item by line item on how you made that correction. You can even send in pictures if you would like on how the correction was made. But the time frame from the time you get the report to the time frame you have to tell us the defects have been corrected, you have 30 days. If for some reason during that time you need an extension on that because either of the complexity or the availability of getting in and doing the work, because in some cases the building may have to shut down a system for you to do that, then we are able to work with you. But no communication is not acceptable. If for some reason you were to need an extension, then all you have to do is pick up the phone, tell us why, and we'll try to work with you every way we can. Once we've done the annual audit, once everything is completed, then we will issue you a new or revised certificate of compliance for the following year. It's not as cumbersome and as difficult as one would suspect it to be, as long as the installations and all of the documentation meets the codes and meets the standards that are required. We don't make anything up here. We guide strictly on the same thing you will guide on when you do your installations. So next slide, please. Okay, to be, not to be, costs. Let's go to the next slide.
It's there, Arnie.
Okay, I'm not getting it. So, all right. Costs are really going to be determined by the type of listing that your company is going for. It can, again, there's 11 type listings that you could apply for. So the cost is directly going to be associated with the amount of work, the time that's involved, and how many days we have to spend with you to complete the audit, listing, inspection. Time, there's definitely an investment of time from your standpoint to get ready to be listed, and there's also an investment of time from your company standpoint to maintain that listing. There's no question about it. Financial, becoming and staying listed is not free, nor should it be. But it's also why the listed company should be able to charge more for the service. Again, you not only have third-party backing, you have to have a maintenance, inspection, and testing agreement in effect for the certificated system. Not just you, but any listed company that's going to compete with you to install a certificated system has to do the same thing that you do. So you are on an equal playing field, and I cannot understate that enough, because everyone who's installing certificated systems, whether they be burglary or fire, whether they're recognized by any of the three NRTLs that we're going to touch base on really quickly here in a minute, has to do the same thing, because they have to meet the same standards and the same codes. So if we can kind of move along to the next slide, Michael.
You there?
Okay. Choosing your third-party laboratory. Next one, please. This is what we're going to talk about briefly, because I'm running out of time here, and I want to wrap this up as soon as I can. Number one, are they accredited and recognized? Because if they're not, then they can't give you the service that you need. Are they willing to work with you? And when I say that, are they willing to help you achieve the listing? Are they willing to talk with you? Are they willing to answer your questions? And are they willing to help in general? It's very important, because it's a learning experience for both parties. Every time I deal with a new alarm company, I learn as well as they learn. And that's a great experience to have. Allow you to do what's best for you and your customer. And that's really important too, not only from a cost standpoint, but what kind of customer service do you get from the third-party laboratory? Because if you get good service from them, then you can give your customer good service. So if we go on to the next one, Michael. Okay, we're going to talk about a couple myths. Only UL can list alarm companies. That is definitely false. So if we could go on to the next one. The next slide is going to show you national recognized testing laboratories by OSHA. And out of all of the ones on the right-hand side, they are all national and currently recognized OSHA NRTLs. But there are only three major players in the alarm business, whether it be fire or burglary. They are Intertek, Factory Mutual, and Underwriters Laboratories. They are the only three laboratories right now that can certificate or give you a listing to where you can certificate an alarm system. Again, the three: Intertek, ETL, FM approved, or UL. So we go on to the next one.
You there?
Certification inhibits my ability to use the listed products I want. Well, and if the initial onset of reading this, some would say fact. However, it's also false. And I'm going to explain to you why here as soon as we go to the next slide. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulty we've been having all day, but we're doing the best we can. The three laboratories I mentioned before that are recognized by OSHA and can service the alarm field: ETL, Intertek, UL, Factory Mutual approved. In the fire category, all three organizations can do this, can certificate you for a listing in that field, and can issue certificates for installations in that field. From a security standpoint, only Intertek, ETL, or UL can do that. FM is only in fire. The third category, and probably one of the most important, is does not limit products based on certification. Intertek, ETL is the only one of the three that does that. And what I mean by that is that if you are Intertek, ETL listed and you choose to use a other national recognized testing laboratory labeled piece of equipment or listed piece of equipment and an Intertek installation, we will allow it. We look upon the fact that if you're a national recognized testing laboratory by OSHA, who are we to say that your product is not acceptable? So we will allow that. So you can marry equipment that's approved or listed by FM, UL into an Intertek ETL system, and it will be acceptable. The other two organizations do not allow this. If it's not listed product by them, they will not accept another recognized testing laboratories labeling. So I'm running a shade over here, so what I would like to do now is turn it back over to Michael for a moment and see if there are any questions that come in during this presentation. And I thank you very much for your attention. I thank you very much for taking the time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule to attend this. And I think it's very important. So thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Arnie. I got a couple questions that have come in. So I'd like to just go ahead and ask you those right now. The first one is, do all the companies like a UL or FM or UL, excuse me, or Intertek, have to test to the same standards when listing a company?
All of the national recognized testing laboratories in the alarm field program, whether it be Intertek, Factory Mutual, or UL, test to the same exact standards and the same exact codes. We are no different when it comes to that. Okay, excellent. Another question that we had that came in, does that, the electronic certificate system, I'm assuming that talking about the Alarm Direct, does it have a monthly or a yearly cost? It does not. It's free to our listed clients. It is a service we are happily able to provide. Okay. Let's see here. I'm sorry while I sort through a couple of these here. Oh, here's a good one. Does Intertek accept transfer listings from other companies like a UL or FM? Yes, we accept transfer listings, and we will not, if you are going to transfer your listing from another national recognized laboratory to us, we are not only happy to help you convert over to ETL and ETL listings, we will also help you transfer all your certificates from the existing NRTL that they are certificated by to ETL certificates and help enter them in Alarm Direct so that you can have your ETL certificates available to print out as soon as possible once the transition is completed. Okay, excellent. Here's a good question that I know that we sometimes see. It may not be as relatable to this, but it's still very good as well. What is the difference between Intertek and ETL? There is no difference. Intertek, ETL is a label for Intertek. ETL actually stands for Edison Testing Laboratory, but it is a mark that Intertek owns. So it is confusing sometimes that people think that Intertek and ETL are not the same, but in fact it is, and ETL is the mark that Intertek owns. Another interesting point to that is that because not many people recognize Intertek or /ETL separately, they think that we're the new kid on the block, when in fact Intertek is over 30,000 employees in 100 countries with 1,000 different laboratories. So we are, and we've been around a long, long time, and so it's good to get that information out whenever we can.
Excellent, excellent. Here's a good one. Question regarding the types of alarms that you can certificate to. The question says, we install both fire and burglar alarms at our company. Is it possible to be just listed for one of those, or do both need to be, when Intertek comes out there, the question got cut a little short, when Intertek comes out, do you need to be certificated to both fire and burglar, or can only one of those two be chosen?
If you choose not to be certificated for both, you can pick whichever one. That's strictly up to you. If you wanted to be listed for both, we can do that as well, but the choice is 100% yours.
Okay, and then here's one. It came in a little bit before the miss portion that you mentioned, but I think it's worth mentioning again. It says, can you verify that ETL will accept differently listed products when listing a system? So I assume that has to go, Arnie, with the question about the UL will only list to one, but Intertek will list to many. Can you just address that again shortly?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to, because it's a question we get asked a lot in the field, actually, from not only potential new clients, but some existing clients, because a lot of the transition companies we have from other NRTLs that have come over to us, one of the main things that was involved was the fact that, well, the equipment we have out on our installations is listed by another national recognized testing laboratory, so will you accept it once we become ETL listed? And the answer is absolutely yes, because again, they're a national recognized testing laboratory by OSHA, so who are we to say that we shouldn't accept equipment? As long as it's compatible with the other equipment used in the system, that's what we're looking for. If compatibility has been established and the equipment is listed by a national recognized testing laboratory, Intertek ETL will accept it.
Okay. Well, and thank you very much for that, Arnie. And we have come to time. We still have a few questions that we weren't able to get to. Thanks everyone for, first off, asking the questions and being directly involved with this. And thank you for all of your time. For those who did ask questions that we weren't able to get to, we'll be able to respond to you in those, hopefully, even if not by day's end, but definitely within the next 24 hours. So we have your contact information. We'll reach out directly to you. We'll be able to get that information to you. So, so those, I think, are the names that I saw flash up on the screen. Everyone from a Scott to a Shannon and Troy there, we'll be able to respond to you. But again, thank you all for your time. I know that we've hit our hour limit, so thank you to ESA for allowing us to sponsor this webinar. Hopefully you are all able to gather some solid information from this. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we'll also be sending out a follow-up email with this, with a link to this webinar, so you're able to capture some of the information should you have missed any, and then also a link to the former webinar that Jacqueline mentioned at the very, very beginning. So thank you all for your time. Look forward to working with you all in the future. Take care.